When we look at modern missiles, now so vital to national strength and survival, it is startling to remember that such a tremendous and revolutionary development is so recent, largely since World War II. But the beginnings were much earlier, during World War I. That was when the Bug was planned, partly under the supervision of Orville Wright and a young officer who later became General Hap Arnold. The Bug was a small pilotless airplane with a conventional engine and a built-in guidance system. It was intended to carry a TNT bomb, and though it was never used in combat, it was in fact a guided missile, our first. The development of the modern missile had to wait for the beginning of the right kind of propulsion. And this again was the work of an American, Dr. Robert H. Goddard. In 1926 in Massachusetts, he achieved the first firing of a liquid fuel rocket. It reached an altitude of only 184 feet, but it was the first demonstration of the techniques that later gave us long-range missiles and the launchings of satellites and the sending of vehicles into space. Goddard was the father of modern rocketry, but it was a long time before the significance of his work was appreciated by his countrymen. During the 1930s, Goddard was in New Mexico, working largely by himself and without government support. In his research and experiments, he did not have military missiles in mind. His objective and his achievement was a propulsion system that could send rockets to high altitudes. It took years for the United States to get around to making military use of Goddard's ideas. So, during World War II, the guided missiles used by our Army Air Forces were unpowered bomb carriers, launched from aircraft and controlled by radio. Another type was the Weary Willie, a dispensable conventional aircraft loaded with TNT. Without a pilot, it was guided to its target by radio control. Such weapons were valuable as a phase of development, but they were far from being missiles in the modern sense. What really woke everybody up, including America, was the deadly use by the Germans of the V-1 and the V-2. In 1936, they had started their Peenemünde project to develop missiles of an entirely new type. In other words, they had been hard at it in a period when little official notice was given to modern military rocketry in the United States. Still, it was 8 years before the Germans were ready to fire their new missiles, and their first one was not a rocket. It was the buzz bomb, the V-1. Its propulsion was by pulse jet engine. The Germans fired more than 7,000 of them, of which more than 2,000 reached London, causing many thousands of casualties and vast damage. But the V-1 was slow, a good target for anti-aircraft artillery or fighter planes. Nearly 4,000 of them were brought down. In September of that same year, 1944, the Germans also began their firings of the vastly superior V-2, which was powered by a real liquid fuel engine. Military rockets in a rudimentary form had been used for centuries, but their propulsion was by the use of gunpowder. In this new era, it was the Germans who realized that the liquid fuel rocket could be put to military use. that it could be given impressive range and great destructive power. Thus, the advent of the V-2 had great historical significance, for with it, modern military missiles entered a new phase. More than 1,100 fell on England. They not only took a toll of more than 9,000 casualties, they also had a devastating psychological effect. For unlike the buzz bomb, the V-2 fell without warning. It had a speed of 3,300 miles per hour, and it could not be intercepted by fighter aircraft or brought down by anti-aircraft artillery. The V-2 blasted open a new era. But the Germans have always admitted that they could not have brought off this achievement without the research and example of the American Goddard. At the end of World War II, captured V-2 missiles and components were brought to the United States. Good use was made of them at White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. Reassembled and modified V-2s were tremendously valuable teaching tools in what was soon to become a vigorous American effort to enter the rocket missile age.
3, 2, 1, 0.
As for the future, well, it looks like this. Giant rockets burning liquid oxygen and alcohol, maneuvered by electronic devices, point their noses into the sky, to other continents, other planets, knows where, but always climbing through space to write another great chapter in the exciting history of flying
This is National Headquarters for Practical Research in Ultra-Modern Weapons of War. Here on the desert ringed by mountains, a German V-2 rocket is being tested by the Army. The White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, where the test explosion of the atomic bomb was staged. And rockets of the future will be charged with atomic explosive. The armed forces study national defense against a possible nightmare future of atomic rocket warfare. Raised upright for launching, German rocket scientists are here. Fuel poured in, instead of a high explosive warhead, radio gadgets. High-ranking observers watch the test. British Field Marshal Sir Maitland Wilson, American Admiral Ramsey, and of Burma-China fame, General Stilwell. The rocket, which stands 46 feet and weighs 14 tons, is driven by liquid oxygen and alcohol. And the sound camera presents the record to eye and ear. They follow the rocket. Like a speck with a long tail, it soars to a height of 75 miles. It landed 39 miles away. No explosive warhead, but remains a fuel-blasted a crater 25 feet deep.
There is another class of weapons, another delivery system which may in time supersede manned bombers. Missiles. Late in World War II, the Germans had developed this V-2 missile. After the war was over, both the Soviet Union and the United States seized German missiles. The V-2 had a short range, 200 miles. Its altitude was 60 miles. It was highly inaccurate, but it was a beginning. In both the United States and the Soviet Union, the V-2 was improved, became a prototype for later missiles. Both nations are looking for a weapon that can be fired 5,000 miles, that will come to Earth at a speed above 10,000 miles an hour. In the nose cone of such a missile will be placed a nuclear warhead. What fuels to use? Liquid oxygen, alcohol, sodium permanganate? What fuels will take a missile 500 miles into the air at speeds of thousands of miles an hour? How do you keep the warhead from burning up as it re-enters the thick blanket of the Earth's atmosphere at a speed approaching that of a meteor? In the wastelands of the United States, and presumably in the wastelands of the Soviet Union, both nations are testing components of a missile that can carry a nuclear warhead 5,000 miles and deliver it on target. Jet bomber warfare assumes at a minimum 6 hours between continents. Missile warfare is based on the premise that a nuclear warhead may be delivered in 30 minutes or less. To solve these problems, both nations have enlisted scientists, engineers, technicians. The technologies of both nations, the skills of both nations are involved in crash programs to solve the problems of range and accuracy. We are far beyond the V-2. Neither nation has as yet achieved the necessary 5,000-mile range. But Soviet statements indicate they have solved the problem at ranges up to 1,500 miles. American statements indicate we have advanced to the same point. And because neither nation feels that it can permit the other to get a commanding lead in the field of missiles, both nations will solve the problem. What will it cost to achieve the intercontinental ballistic missile? Both countries must appropriate a significant part of their national incomes. And because both countries are rich in resources, because both countries are determined to solve the problem will be solved. The inevitable countdown must finally reach zero.
This is Araby Command to all stations. On my mark, the time will be X minus 3 minutes. Mark. This is Araby Command to all stations. On my mark, the time will be X minus 2 minutes. Mark. This is Araby Command to all stations. On my mark, the time will be X minus 1 minute. Mark. Thirty seconds.
30 seconds.
25 seconds.
25 seconds.
20 seconds.
20 seconds.
15.
15.
14.
14.
13. 12. 11. 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Fire. Missile away. What is happening is out of man's sight and reaches beyond man's world. It is coming to a point almost beyond man's comprehension. The nuclear warheads are so devastating
that no one can understand what they mean. The missiles are reaching heights and speeds beyond man's capacity to understand. But this must be understood. It is possible that no man in the world will be more than 30 minutes away from nuclear destruction. It is possible that defenses will be found, that missile will be set off to intercept missile in the outer space that is no man's air. It can be assumed that both countries are working toward a defense against the intercontinental ballistic missile. Yet the detecting devices may have to be something beyond radar, and an intercepting missile will have to climb slowly through the thick blanket of the lower air to intercept a missile that is traveling at an incredible speed. Yet, out of weapons of destruction beyond belief, delivered by instruments too high and too fast to be seen, there is arising a hope beyond belief, the hope that the world has seen its last major war. For it is a military axiom that no country attacks unless it expects to win a victory. And with the almost instantaneous nuclear retaliation that is developing, no country can attack without expecting a counterattack equally devastating. If no nation has a commanding lead in weapons, no nation can escape retaliation. Thus, from the ultimate weapons of air power may come the greatest hope of man, peace. The struggle for men's minds will continue. Tyranny may continue, but the major wars that have torn apart the 20th century may come to an end. All the bombers, all the missiles that man has built may point skywards and never be used in anger. Air power has made peace no longer a dream, but a hope and a possibility.
In World War II, we had already used several types of small rocket-driven weapons. And in Korea, the Air Force again used such weapons launched from aircraft against targets either on the ground or in the air. And before long, we had others, including the Falcon, a fast, accurate, and powerful guided missile launched from our interceptor aircraft. The Genie, an unguided weapon, is the first air-to-air missile that carries a nuclear warhead. It, too, is launched from Air Force fighter aircraft. The Matador was the Air Force's first successful ground-to-ground guided missile. It is boosted off by a rocket, and then a turbojet engine takes over. Electronically controlled by ground personnel, the Matador is a reliable tactical missile that can be armed with a nuclear warhead. Version of the Matador, larger, faster, and of greater range. Our first answer to the need for a long-range strategic missile was the Snark. Again, a jet pilotless aircraft started on its flight by rocket boosters. The Snark was the world's first intercontinental missile. It had a range of about 5,000 miles. Pilotless interceptor, the Air Force Beaumark, a guided missile launched from the ground and capable of destroying approaching hostile bombers hundreds of miles from our shores at very high altitudes. It gained much importance in plans for the defense of our borders. After launching by a rocket, it is powered at supersonic speed by twin ramjet engines. Through the period of missile development in the 1950s, the concept of the mixed force was evolving. That is, We of course needed and for years would continue to need manned aircraft. Vastly improved bombers capable of delivering nuclear weapons became ready for use. The B-47 as a highly dependable modern medium bomber, and the B-52 as a fine long-range bomber, like the B-47, a source of the Strategic Air Command's great deterrent strength. For a considerable period, each of the two systems, manned aircraft and ballistic missiles, would have its own marked advantages. But while the successful use of bombers depends to some extent on tactics and countermeasures, a ballistic missile, with its hypersonic speed, can reach its target with small risk of interception by enemy aircraft. It was a most promising partner to the long-range bomber. So, in the 1950s, we embarked on one of the greatest crash programs in our history for the development of intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles. With the Thor, the Air Force had its first intermediate range missile. It began a series of successful launchings in 1957 and was destined to win a place for itself in the arsenal of the free world. Besides being a good military missile, the Thor has been used with great success as a booster for satellites and space probes. The Air Force is rightly proud of the Thor. It was in this decade of the 1950s that missiles were brought into the family of weapons of aerospace warfare. It was a revolutionary development that had the most profound effect on international relations, on the minds of men everywhere, on national objectives, and on military planning. For missiles made necessary a new concept of aerospace power, the mixed force. Manned aircraft, now so powerful and reliable, would still be indispensable. But now we needed the advantages of missiles too. And after long and hard effort, we had them. At a number of our overseas installations, we had the Matador, a limited-range missile that gave a new kind of capability to our tactical forces. Our British allies established bases for the use of the Thor, our own Air Force intermediate-range ballistic missile. And from stateside installations, the Atlas, our first intercontinental ballistic missile, became ready for use under control of the Strategic Air Command. We had a complementary weapon to be used against any target which we could foresee in potentially hostile nations, no matter how far distant. Our worldwide Air Force derives its strength from many sources. We had our missiles, ready to deliver deadly counterblows upon any antagonist who dared to attack us. Test missiles were of immense value in the accelerated program for the development of an intercontinental missile. The X-10, though driven by turbojet engines, taught us much about aerodynamic design for missiles with supersonic speed and about automatic guidance. And the X-17, a three-stage test missile, revealed much needed information on nose cone design. It saved a lot of time and money in solving problems of re-entry at high speed and consequent high temperatures. In 1955, the highest national priority was given, by order of the President, to the development of the Atlas. Late in 1957, the Air Force achieved the first successful launching of this giant. Some months later, when the Atlas was fully tested, our country took on new confidence in its missile capability. The Atlas became a vital part of our military strength, and other formidable missiles, such as Titan and Minuteman, were in the research and testing stage. In the short span of 40 years, we had progressed from the bug, small, slow, feeble, uncertain, and certainly primitive, to powerful, long-range, supersonic rocket-powered missiles, a tremendous technical achievement by many thousands of people in and out of uniform who labored in the interests of the United States Air Force.